shopping malls and buses where young people merely dressed in black can be searched or even arrested without justification. In other words, merely being young is a crime in the police state of Hong Kong. The protests began with the extradition bill, but at the core it has always been about these fundamental conflicts between two very different sets of values. On one hand, the China model, which has no respect over human rights and the rule of law, and our hybrid city that has enjoyed these very freedoms for the most of its existence with a deep attachment to these universal values that the United States and other Western societies treasure. Hong Kong represents something unique in the world. We have long held dear our rule of law, transparent institutions, and the freedom of expression in a part of the world where these are most often threatened than upheld. However, this system is now under great threat. Companies like Hong Kong's major airline Cathay Pacific has succumbed to political pressure, firing dozens of employees due to their political stance. The business community is coerced into making political decisions. As a singer and activist from Hong Kong, I have experienced the suppression firsthand. Ever since the umbrella movement in 2014, I have been blacklisted by the communist government. My songs and my name are censored on Chinese internet. Pressured by the Chinese government, sponsors have pulled out, even international brands have kept their distances. For the past 5 years, and even more so recently, China tried to smear and silence me with their propaganda machines, spreading false claims. Right now, I am facing threats from pro-Beijing supporters and could face arrest and prosecution at any time. Not only have I faced difficulties in both China and Hong Kong, but the self-censorship has now spread towards global institutions and cities. Recently, the National Gallery of Victoria in Melbourne, Australia, denied venue to an event of Chinese artist Badiu Cao and myself due to security concerns. Celebrities from Hong Kong, Taiwan, and China are all pressured into voicing their unanimous support for the Beijing government and could be condemned for keeping their silence. Hong Kongers are now living in a constant fear and have unfortunately lost the most of our freedoms. For a city that has been famously known as politically indifferent, the younger generations have took up the role to safeguard our home, standing up courageously to the corrupted system in spite of increased suppression. To the rest of the world, the United States is often a symbol of freedom and democracy. The freedom Americans enjoy is something that the people of Hong Kong have long hoped for. Even though our languages and cultures differ, what we have in common is the pursuit for justice, freedom, and democracy. Through the challenges of Hong Kong, the West is also waking up to China's insinuating power in a global scale. Hong Kong is connected to the world in multiple ways, but China is trying to isolate it to exert control. If Hong Kong falls, it would easily become the springboard for the totalitarian regime of China to push its rules and priorities overseas, utilizing its economic powers to conform others to their communist values, just as they have done with Hong Kong in the past 22 years. The US and its allies have everything to fear if they wish to maintain a world that is free, open, and civil. I therefore urge the US Congress to stand by Hong Kong, and most of all, to pass the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act. This is not a plea for the so-called foreign interference. This is a plea for democracy. This is a plea for the freedom to choose. And lastly, I would like to quote Eleanor Roosevelt, your most beloved First Lady. You gain strength, courage, and confidence by every experience in which you really stop to look fear in the face. You are able to say to yourself, I lived through this horror. I can take the next thing that comes along. This is a global fight for the universal values that we all cherish, and Hong Kong is in the very front lines of this fight. We are once fearful of what might have come with our silence, and for that, we have now become fearless. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Jung, welcome.
Chairman McGovern, Co-Chairman Rubio, and members of the committee, thank you for your invitation to this hearing. Last year, Chinese President Xi Jinping said in a closed-door meeting that China would never embrace the judicial independence in the West. This is why people in Hong Kong are trying hard to reject the extradition bill because we do not believe in a country who looks down on human rights, disqualifying our legislators and kidnapping our booksellers. We want to protect our legal system as the last barrier against Beijing's political interference. Apart from asking for the withdrawal of the bill, Hong Kong people also demand for an investigation into police brutality to save Hong Kong from turning into a police state. More importantly, we demand for the universal suffrage. We deeply believe that without any structural political reform and a government chosen by the people, there is no possibility for Hong Kong to restore prosperity. We cannot have a society compromising the interests of individuals. The voice of these people should always be heard. Unfortunately, our government ignores our demands by saying that we have no stake in the society. Our student union members are detained, followed, beaten, and threatened. During the detainment, one of our student union members were told by the police that it was reasonable for them to rape some female protester when they frequently worked overtime. Besides, the authority tries to stop us from having peaceful car strike when more than 50,000 students participating in it. People who side with Beijing are now advocating to install surveillance cameras inside the classroom to monitor teachers and students who dare to support car strike and support the movement. This apparently violates our academic freedom and freedom of speech. This is the rights terror created by the Beijing government, which should be alerted by all people here. Nowadays, students and Hong Kong people are even ready to die for Hong Kong, and some already did. They believe that the only limit to their freedom is their death. This is the ultimate sacrifice for the motherland, and we must not forget them. Many students face strong objection from their family. Some of them are even forced to leave home. But they still choose to head to the front line carrying a letter with their last will. They are determined. They understand that the price of freedom is high. It always has been. But it is a price they are willing to pay, and it is a path of liberation they are willing to choose. We do not fight for freedom out of passion. Passion will burn out. We fight for freedom from a sense of duty and dignity. China is rising. China is using its nationalism and invasive economic dominance to colonize small countries and put intense pressure on people and companies like Cathay Pacific who do not conform to them. Teachers, students, civil servants, businessmen are all facing political purge in Hong Kong. This new form of imperialism of China poses a severe threat to Hong Kong. This is a clash of values and system. We need to contain the Communist Party of China. Offering help to Hong Kong is the primary move to contain China. One country, two systems will expire in 2047. US government should help Hong Kong people have the right to decide our future. Therefore, we urge the US Congress to pass the Human Rights and Democracy Act to expand the current sanction list to all individuals who infringe our human rights. Moreover, if a genuine universal suffrage cannot be achieved immediately, our autonomy and rule of law will continue to erode. The situation of China manipulating Hong Kong as a backdoor for trading with Iran and North Korea will also continue. Then, the US government should not acknowledge the special status of Hong Kong. US must send a strong signal that this special status should be cancelled if Hong Kong lost its autonomy in order to put pressure on China. Otherwise, China will keep taking advantage of Hong Kong as an international society but hollow out our liberal values. With such an assertive policy, it demonstrates that America will no longer tolerate totalitarianism. Hong Kong people will take every step with the last inch of our effort to fight for democracy and freedom. As Thomas Jefferson once said that he would be forever against any form of tyranny. And I believe this is the time for Americans to stand with Hong Kong. 光復香港，時代革命。Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Home, welcome.
Thank you. Chairman McGovern, Co-Chair Rubio, and members of the Commission, thank you for this opportunity. It's an honor for me to stand in solidarity with the frontline activists. I want to thank the Commission members for their critical support for the Hong Kong people and your leadership on the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act and the Protect Hong Kong Act. Over the past 3 months, the whole world has witnessed the historic David and Goliath standoff. And against all odds, the Hong Kong people are standing up to the powerful authoritarian regime in Beijing. In this historic battle, they are not only fighting for the democratic future of 7.4 million Hong Kong people, but they're holding the regional and global front line on preserving human dignity and rights for all people. As Congressman McGovern has already mentioned, the past summer of discontent is in fact part of years of ongoing resistance by the Hong Kong people against Beijing's encroachment on Hong Kong's autonomy, rights, and freedom. The mass demonstrations in the past have included resistance against security legislation, official brainwashing initiatives, and the gutting of the promised genuine universal suffrage. After the clearance of the Occupy Central sites, democracy activists left a promise inscribed on the concrete sidewalks. We will return. They have kept that promise. Instead of Beijing's hope for movement fatigue, the protests, supported by unflagging solidarity and broad, diverse participation of Hong Kong society, are moving into the 15th week, pressing for now 5 non-negotiable demands. The out-of-control, lawless actions of the Hong Kong police have provided mobilization fuel for Hong Kong people to add oil. As Chairman Mao said, wherever there is suppression, there will be resistance. And at the beginning of the Cultural Revolution, he also said, anyone who crushes the student movement will not have a good ending. I want to talk about the rule of law just briefly because there are tensions that were baked into the one country, two systems framework, making one country, one system, or 1.5 system perhaps an inevitable outcome. Taiwan's president, Tsai Ing-wen's takeaway from the current political crisis hits the nail on the head. Not only is one country, two systems not a viable model for Taiwan, but the Hong Kong example proves that dictatorship and democracy cannot coexist. An independent functioning rule of law is essential, yet the Chinese state constitution and numerous high-level policy pronouncements legitimizes the subordination of law to the leadership of the party. The reintroduction of the Article 23 legislation that's in the works in Hong Kong will inevitably carry imprints of the party's concepts of national security. Second, the demand for complete loyalty to the party guts the independence of key pillars of rule of law, legal profession, and the media. But Hong Kong is not the mainland yet. Despite efforts like the proposed Hong Kong national anthem law and proposed loyalty requirements, loyalty, pride, and love cannot be legislated. So it's not surprising that Hong Kong people, foreign business, and the international community have been alarmed. The outrageous and painful excessive violence and abuse of law by the police have already been extensively described. I will move to then talking about what's at stake in terms of the universal values. China's aggressive activism at the UN is undermining international standards, weakening the existing human rights mechanisms, and restricting the participation of independent civil society. This cuts Hong Kong people, as well as human rights defenders on the mainland and Tibetan and Uyghur communities, from the key international platforms that's available to press for accountability. With this, instead of the West's hope for convergence, China is not only playing by the rules, it is vocally and persistently asserting a set of relativist criteria that it alone can apply and pushing for Chinese models of human rights, democracy, and development. That is, no human rights, no development, and no democracy. This rhetoric helps to intimidate, silence, and deflect from the accountability of the state. I want to point quickly to its role in blocking independent voices. China sits on the ECOSOC committee of the UN, and Gongos, who do not face any objections, such as the interruptions of Denise Ho's recent intervention at the Human Rights Council. The intervention last week by Patsy Ho, the representative of the Hong Kong Federation of Women, is illustrative. She not only defended the SAR government's handling of the protests, but she accused the Hong Kong protesters of child exploitation and more. Patsy Ho, co-chairman and director of Macau Casino Operation, and is also a standing committee member of the Beijing Municipal Committee of the Chinese People's Consultative Conference. Because I am out of time, I want to really take the time to jump ahead to the problem of in addition to the disinformation campaign, including the egregious use by the China Daily on 9/11 of a photo depicting the destruction of the World Trade Towers to warn of terrorist attacks by Hong Kong protesters. Beijing is advancing a narrative of violence to frame the Hong Kong protests that is echoed uncritically by the international community. Within this framework, the Hong Kong police, protected in full tactical gear, armed with rubber bullets, guns, tear gas, pepper spray, and batons, wielding the coercive power of the state, is presented as one side of an escalating violence, clashes with civilian protesters. Hence, we hear both sides calls to de-escalate, but this deflects attention away from police accountability for its excessive use of force and its complicity with non-state violence. Moreover, the narrow violence framing of the situation on the ground is erasing or marginalizing intentionally the proliferation of diverse, creative, and peaceful protests by the Hong Kong people, including by students in boycotts, elderly citizens, silver-hair volunteers protecting the children actions, Hong Kong people singing in the malls, in the metro stations, in neighborhood gatherings, shouting the 10 p.m. shouts of slogans echoing throughout all the neighborhoods in Hong Kong, and forming human chains, creating Lenin walls. And last Friday was Mid-Autumn Festival, and a small family-owned.
The same as Deng Xiaoping's notion that proffered peaceful coexistence between the communist and Hong Kong systems. Instead, it has been replaced by Xi Jinping's new era one country, two systems model, embracing political struggle, an enemy-friend binary, and foregrounding Chinese national security as the paramount lens for governing the special administrative region and implementing one country, two systems. Rather than a confidence-building mechanism ensuring peaceful coexistence, one country, two systems under Xi Jinping is now intended to advance and safeguard China's sovereignty, security, and development interests. 2, this new era one country, two systems model is informed by Xi Jinping's broader national security concepts known as the three major dangers in national security with Chinese characteristics. The former situates communist China at imminent risk of being invaded, toppled, and separated, and its development, reform, and stability sabotaged, thereby leading to the derailing of China's rise, socialist modernization, and the one country, two systems policy. The latter dramatically broadens the notion of Chinese national security and radically expands the scope of Chinese authorities' prerogatives in administering one country, two systems. Consequently, it significantly erodes the special administrative region's high degree of autonomy, diminishes Hong Kongers' freedoms, and widens the threat to U.S. citizens and national interests in Hong Kong. Third, under Xi Jinping's new security paradigms and new era one country, two systems model, dissident Hong Kongers have been systematically enemified and securitized as mortal threats to the party state and banned or removed from positions of political power. Elections have been partially nullified, Hong Kongers disenfranchised, and terrorized with real and rhetorical political violence. The promise of Hong Kong people ruling Hong Kong has been effectively replaced with the tyrannical role of patriots. Official declarations and party state media propagating Hong Konger enemy and Hong Kong threat security discourses have become ubiquitous, and cultural revolution like Mass Line and United Front denunciation campaigns targeting Democrats, localists, and westernized Hong Kongers have swept the city repeatedly over the last 7 years since Xi Jinping came to power. 4, since at least 2012, Hong Kong and one country, two systems have been perceived by Beijing as communist China's weakest links in its resurgent totalitarian national security state. For Chinese authorities, both are at the forefront of ideological confrontation with the United States and the West, a new Cold War in their terms. By the end of 2014 and the Umbrella Movement, the struggle to rule Hong Kong was said to have matched the intensity surrounding the 1997 handover, and that China had to now rethink how to rule the enclave. An influential advisor to senior Chinese authorities said that Hong Kong faced a society-wide, quote-unquote, long-term struggle to eradicate the party-state's enemies in the city, a de facto cultural revolution that would involve, at a minimum, rectifying and synthesizing the judiciary, legislature, media, secondary schools, and universities. Chinese and special administrative regions' furtive efforts to impose the communist legal, political, and social norms on Hong Kong via the extradition law and unprecedented violent suppression of protests have provoked the most severe crisis of one country, two systems, as Hong Kongers fight for their endangered freedoms, identity, and way of life. This is not an anomaly. It is the sixth Chinese governance crisis involving one country, two systems since 2003, and the fifth since Xi Jinping took control of Hong Kong affairs. Each has an underlying Chinese national security nexus seeking to broaden Beijing's powers, its so-called comprehensive jurisdiction in Hong Kong, and to roll back Hong Kongers' high degree of autonomy, liberal freedoms, and limited democracy by forcibly transforming Hong Kong into a Chinese communist city while maintaining a veneer of no changes. My next few observations will quickly touch upon the extradition law nexus to national security. Senior Chinese officials have described the battle, the extradition battle right now, as a quote-unquote battle of life and death and as a battle to defend Hong Kong, a decisive war defending one country's or two systems or jeopardizing it. Since Xi Jinping came to power, national security is now a mandatory obligation for people in the Hong Kong SAR. This was never written in the original basic law. This has been done post facto since 2012. Early in the extradition law saga, senior Chinese leaders have made extraordinary endorsements of the extradition law, expressing their full support. This included two Politburo Standing Committee members, Han Zheng and Wang Yang, the head of the State Council's Hong Kong and Macau Affairs Office, Zhang Xiaoming, and the chief of the Hong Kong SAR Liaison Office, Wang Zhemin. There are also indications that President Xi Jinping, as a member of the Central Coordination Group for Hong Kong and Macau Affairs, has weighed in. An influential United Front commentator and state media has also observed that if it were not for the full support of the central government, the legislation would have been aborted. Chief Executive Carrie Lam recently lamented in a leaked speech that since the issue had been elevated to one of national security and sovereignty, it had stripped her of any solutions or room for political maneuver. Another source explained that because the ELAB involved the mainland special administrative region relationship with the central government and the implementation of the basic law, it was not a matter entirely within the autonomy of the special administrative region government. This touches upon the Hong Kongers' 5 demands as well as U.S. national security, U.S. policy towards Hong Kong. Beijing's imposition of communist, legal, political, and social national security norms on Hong Kong constitute a violation of Article 5 of the Basic Law, prohibiting the introduction of the socialist system in the territory. Moreover, the party's application of its national security with Chinese characteristics, mandates, and loyalty expectations to the special administrative region and its civil servants effectively dissolves any difference between the communist and Hong Kong systems, thereby posing a significant threat to U.S. interests related to the protection of sensitive technologies and adherence to export controls. My last 2 comments before I submit the rest of my testimony. The Hong Kong police force has been militarized and nationalized by the Chinese Communist Party, effectively becoming its little gun in the special administrative region. Since the beginning of 2019, mainland police have been tasked by President Xi with, quote-unquote, preventing and countering color revolutions, unquote. China's public security minister subsequently ordered police to firmly, quote, firmly fight to protect China's political security, unquote, defend its national security and the leadership of the Communist Party. Earlier, Hong Kong police had received similar national security tasking from Vice Premier Han Zheng, who, in August 2018, charged them to, quote-unquote, firmly and effectively safeguard China's national security and rule of law by accurately and comprehensively implementing one country, two systems. Also, according to a vice chairman of the State Council's Chinese Association of Hong Kong and Macau Studies, the Hong Kong police were now, quote-unquote, on the forefront when it came to curbing Hong Kong independence, which meant their duty was not just to maintain public order, but to defend national security too. Chinese Chief Executive Carrie Lam, in a leaked speech, also iterated that the Hong Kong police were the only solution that they currently possess in dealing with the extradition process. In no small way, the Hong Kong police have become the Special Administrative Region's People's Armed Police. My last comment. Chinese authorities have dedicated significant academic, legal, political, propaganda, and United Front resources to systematically manipulating and recasting Deng Xiaoping's error, content, and understandings of the basic law in one country, two systems to accommodate Xi Jinping's totalitarian national security mandates, logics, and outlook. The Chinese Association of Hong Kong and Macau Studies, or Hong Kong Macau Studies Association, a shadowy political warfare-like think tank connected to the State Council's Hong Kong and Macau's Affairs Office, is one of these new subversive vehicles. Concomitantly, a network of party state, constitutional, and basic law experts and scholars, some attached to the National People's Congress Standing Committee, Hong Kong Basic Law Committee, have similarly contributed significantly to the erosion of one country, two systems policy, mobilized political violence, and informed the central authorities' understandings of the actual situation in the region. All these united frontiers are key players in the erosion of Hong Kong's freedoms and democracy and enablers of state tyranny. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll save my questions to the end. I'm going to yield now to the co-chair, Senator Rubio.
Thank you, and I'll just ask one question because I know members have places to go, and I want them to get in on this. But the key issue before us is autonomy. If you go back in 2014, they took away universal suffrage for the chief executive. In 2016 and 17, they they disqualified 6 Democratic lawmakers from legislative council seats using a very controversial interpretation of the Hong Kong Constitution. And then in 2019, this effort at the extradition bill. So my question to all the panelists is, how would you describe the state of Hong Kong autonomy today?
During the last congressional hearing, I strongly aware how one country, two system eroded to be one country, one and a half system. But the recent political crisis by how Hong Kong and Beijing government turned such a global city into the police state with more violence and even white terror, I would describe now as the collapse of one country, two system, and also we are facing the death under the current constitutional framework. And I think now is also the time and the reason which we hope to seek for bipartisan support. Support Hong Kong's democratization should not be the matter of left or right. It should be the matter of right or wrong.
So on a more cultural and social context, there is an immense fear among the people to speak their minds, which is a result of how the businesses and the government institutions, they have put pressure onto their employees or the people to keep their mouths shut, basically. And so this has a huge impact on the economy because without this freedom of speech, it's very difficult for the economy and also the society to thrive because in a sense, we are already in somewhat of a China city situation where people would fear for their safety if they spoke out about their political stance. Just for an example, there has been an unofficial Hong Kong anthem recently that has been written by an anonymous songwriter, and they have opted to keep their anonymity because if they have shown their faces, then most probably they would have been arrested or prosecuted because of on claims of national threats, national security threats. So that's basically the sentiment on the grounds for Hong Kong people.
Last year, the USCC published a report concerns that Hong Kong is becoming more like any other Chinese city. And that means that our autonomy is already gone. And actually, even the USCC has issued a report to claim that the autonomy of Hong Kong is already in danger. In UK, when I met some politicians, I would tell them that the Chinese government already breached the Sino-British Joint Declaration. And that's why I would say the autonomy of Hong Kong is already dead, and that's why we urge the US